Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is John Musella, and I'm with the Santa Cruz Valley Chamber of Commerce, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to be with us today. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple quick housekeeping items so that we're all on the same page. Throughout the webinar, we'd ask that you please use the questions feature in your control panel to submit any questions that you have for the assessor. We will have our Q&A session at the conclusion of his presentation. If you have any issues during this call, if you could just email hello@scvchamber.com. Again, that's hello@scvchamber.com. We will be monitoring that throughout the webinar to be able to assist with any technical issues you might be having. Also, please make sure that you constantly check our events page at scvchamber.com on our website to register for any of our upcoming programs. We are pleased to announce that we are bringing back our business after hours mixer. They will be virtual. Our first mixer is going to be sponsored by UCLA Health and will be on Wednesday, October 21st at 6 p.m. It is free for our members, and we've got a great new platform which allows our members to interact with each other in a new way, because we know a lot of our folks, our business community leaders, have been looking for a way to better network during this time and see each other safely, and this new program platform we'll be bringing will allow us to do that. So we hope to see you there on October 21st at 6 p.m. and you can register again on scvchamber.com. For today's webinar, we are joined by our good friend, LA County Assessor Jeff Prang. With the November election rapidly approaching, I think it's 2.5 weeks away now, and adjusting our lives to this new norm with the pandemic, Assessor Prang was going to be discussing with us Proposition 15 and its real-world effects in the current real estate market in comparison to pre-COVID, different property tax relief programs, and how a business's property value is likely to be affected by COVID-19 and the pandemic. A little bit background about Assessor Jeff Prang. He is in his second term, having been first elected in 2014 and then again by a wide margin in 2018. He served previously for nearly 18 years as a member of the West Hollywood City Council and served 4 terms as mayor while he was there on the council and various other positions in the public sector during his career. Upon taking office in 2014 as the LA County Assessor, Jeff implemented sweeping reforms to ensure that the strictest ethical guidelines rooted in fairness, accuracy, and integrity would be adhered to in his office. The LA County Assessor's Office is the largest office of its kind in the country with 1,400 employees and provides the foundation for a property tax system that generates $17 billion annually. Assessor Jeff Prang has been a huge proponent of the SCV Chamber of Commerce, a good friend of ours and a good friend of mine for over 2 decades, and we are pleased to continue our working relationship with him and his office. At this point in time, I would now like to turn it over to our good friend, Assessor Jeff Prang. Jeff, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, John. It's great to be with you. I think this is well, I've attended a lot of events at the Santa Cruz Valley Chamber over the years. I think this is the first time we've actually really had a really substantive opportunity to speak about things that my office, programs and services and initiatives that my office is involved in. So I appreciate that opportunity. I want to thank you. I want to thank Peter for helping put all this together. I want to give a shout out to my good friend, your board chair, Nancy Starzyk. Hopefully she's listening, and she's been great to work with over the last 6 years. I think the last time we were together was in January when I attended your awards and installation dinner in honoring my colleague, Fire Chief Daryl Osby. And you know, the chamber represents probably over 65,000 workforce members, and I consider business leaders in the community to be an integral part of what I do in my office. You're important stakeholders, and I really am delighted to have this opportunity to work with you and to share information that I think is of mutual concern. So many of you may have heard me speak before. I don't want to assume that everybody here knows who I am and what I do. So if you don't know what the assessor does, don't worry. I have a new staffer who just told me the other day he had to Google it before he took the job. I am often, most people think they know what I do. They think I collect taxes, but I don't. The guy who collects taxes has a really intuitive title. He's called the tax collector. We do valuations. Tax collector collects taxes. But jokes aside, local government can be quite opaque, and trying to get things done is often very frustrating. And probably nowhere is this more frustrating than dealing with property taxes, where a number of complex laws and a multi-agency system oftentimes places taxpayers at a loss as to how to resolve an issue or even who to call. So today I'm going to try to illuminate that system for you. Well, provide you an overview of my role as an elected official. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the 2020 assessment role in the real estate market, and finally, I'll tell you a little bit about these proposed policy changes on the November ballot. So many of you may already know what my office does. I've already told you what we don't do, but let me just share with you a snapshot. As John had indicated in the introduction, I administer a department of nearly 1,400 employees located in 6 different offices throughout the county. About half of my employees are appraisers, real estate appraisers and personal property appraisers. We have a budget of close to $200 million, and we are the largest local assessment agency in the country. As assessor, I'm one of 3 countywide officials. Most people know that there are at least 2, because they're a little bit better known than my office, and that's the sheriff and the district attorney. Although I always tell people that my office is really the most important local government office because no one else can do their job until I've done mine. But in many ways, the assessor is in many ways the fiscal engine of local government, not just for county services, but for municipal government and schools. We determine the value of all taxable property in the county, and these values are the basis for your property taxes. As you can see in the chart on your screen, the assessor has a symbiotic relationship with several other departments that each own a piece of property tax administration, primarily the auditor controller as well as the treasurer tax collector. When my office receives copies of deeds from the registrar recorder or permits and building plans from the cities, we then determine the value of the property. It's the auditor controller who actually tells you what you owe. And then the tax collector is the one who mails the bill and collects the payments. This year, property tax revenues that begin with my office's valuation will provide over $17 billion in revenue for public services, which are needed now more than ever as revenue from sales tax, tourism, and even parking fines have declined because of the COVID pandemic. This means that in terms of government revenues, property taxes are more important now than ever because they're likely to be a bit more stable than the other sources of revenue, and therefore critical to maintaining local services. The type of property which is taxable, the most obvious is real property, which includes land and improvements, but it also includes what we call business personal property. If you own your business, you're probably familiar with this. You have to submit an annual business property statement where you declare the value of your furniture, your equipment, your technology. This also includes airplanes, both commercial aircraft and general aviation aircraft, mobile homes, boats, and believe it or not, we even assess racehorses. By profession and core function, most of my employees are real estate appraisers, and fair, accurate values are key to both a reliable revenue source as well as equity amongst taxpayers. An evaluation of property is, of course, profoundly important to what we do, but the appraisal function and our methodology is not necessarily what matters to most members of the public. But one component that does matter occurs in what we call our ownership division. And this is the unit of my office that they analyze deeds and building permits and other records to determine whether your property has to be reassessed, which will affect your taxes. In California, under Prop 13, property is assessed really only under 2 conditions: when there's a change in ownership or if there's new construction. Your property does not get reassessed absent those 2 conditions. There's a number of common mistakes that consume a lot of our time in our ownership division and with public service. One of the most common involves trusts and other legal entities used in owning property. Technically, moving property into a trust or out of a trust is a transfer and therefore reassessable. However, if you are transferring property, your property from your name into a trust in your name, there are provisions of the law that generally make that not a change in ownership and therefore not reassessable. However, trusts are complicated legal devices, and may often result in an inadvertent mistake that will lead to a reassessment and a supplemental tax bill. So, for instance, if the trust is between you and an entity controlled by you, we need to be able to verify that fact, which typically can be done by providing us with a copy of the entire trust. Any deviation for that matter, adding a spouse on or deleting a spouse or a partner from your from a trust will lead to a reassessment. Importantly, it's really important that if you get a letter from the assessor requesting information or documentation, it is vital that you provide that information to us, because if you don't give it to us, either by ignoring it or sometimes they refuse to give it to us, that won't eliminate our duty to enroll a value. It just means that we're going to enroll that value and make a decision without information. So we're going to make a guess. And we don't guess on the low side, we guess on the high side. I hope that will be enough motivation to persuade you to help us. If you want more information on trusts and similar issues, we have a guide on my website at assessor.lacounty.gov. There's a guide called Quick Guide to Trusts and Tax Savings. Another common and valuable ownership exclusion or tax savings program is the parent to child transfer, also known as Proposition 58. This allows children who inherit property from their parents to keep their parents' tax base. So if your parents bought your home in 1980 for $100,000, today it's worth $1 million, you can inherit that property and still pay taxes based on the $100,000 value. But it's important to remember, this is not automatic. Just because you inherited property doesn't mean you get the tax base. You have to apply for it. If you don't apply for it, we'll see the change in ownership and we'll reassess it. And it's important to know that you have to apply for this even if the property is in a trust. We also administer a number of other programs that allow property owners to save money on their taxes. The easiest one and most accessible is what's called the homeowner's exemption. It's available to anybody who owns their home and lives in it as their primary residence. It allows me to reduce the taxable value of a home by $7,000, which translates into a modest annual savings of $70, although it's money that you're entitled to and it adds up. We estimate that every year about $30 million in tax savings go unclaimed in the county, rarely because homeowners still don't know available to them. For example, data shows the city of Glendale has the highest number of homeowners who don't take advantage of the homeowner's exemption. Almost 50% of the homeowners don't apply for it. In the city of Santa Clarita, 38% of the residents don't claim the homeowner's exemption. And again, it's probably simply because they don't know that it's available to them. I always recommend, particularly to realtors, that when your clients are going in to close on property, that you give them a copy of the homeowner's exemption. Or if you're doing marketing to digital marketing, social media, or even direct mail, maybe include a tip on where to save money on your property taxes, and maybe that'll have your potential clients pay a little bit more attention to you. There are other savings programs available through my office for people living with disabilities, for veterans, those who are impacted by disasters such as the Lake Fire. If you know any property whose property owner whose property sustained a minimum of $10,000 in damage, they are likely to be eligible for temporary property tax relief, including a refund on taxes already paid. We call that misfortune calamity. If your property experiences $10,000 of damage or more due to flood, fire, earthquake, or other natural disaster, you can apply for this temporary relief. We will also proactively look for those properties that are damaged and apply that relief, but one way or another, either through your own application or through our field work, we'll try to make that available to as many people as needed. So the primary responsibility of the assessor is the production of what we call the annual assessment roll, which is essentially the inventory of all taxable property in the county. All revenues generated through property taxes are allocated to local government, county services, cities, and schools. I am required to complete the annual assessment roll by June 30th of each year. And while it's our valuations are required to be fair and equitable for taxpayers without consideration of revenue, It's also critical that the assessment roll be thorough and complete to ensure that everything that should be on the assessment roll is there. That will ensure that property tax revenues are as thorough as they can be. If we overlook properties, then dollars that should be allocated to vital public services such as police and fire, roads, public health all go uncollected. We establish property value every year on January 1st. We call that the lien date, which gives us about 6 months to prepare this extensive analysis by roll closure date. The roll also serves as an important planning document for local governments because they're preparing their budgets in anticipation of property tax revenues, but it also serves as an important economic indicator, giving some insight as to the health of the real estate market. This year was particularly challenging in preparation of the assessment roll because COVID-19 changed the way we normally conduct business. But I can report that the 2020 assessment roll came in at $1.77 trillion, total assessed value of all property in LA County, which, as you can imagine, that the market value would be considerably higher. Property values in LA County grew 5.97% in the fiscal year ending June 30th, just slightly less than last year's growth of 6.25%. And not to get too deep into the details of the 2020 assessment roll, here's a couple of highlights. The transfer of real estate, which is the buying and selling, were the largest contributor to the increase in the assessment roll, adding $48.3 billion, which was just over a 3% increase over last year. New construction added $12 billion to the roll. And finally, 14,000 properties that had been receiving a decline in value assessment were restored to their Prop 13 base year, which added another $1.5 billion to the assessment roll. And on top of that, there was Prop 13 allows for an annual cost of living adjustment, which is capped at 2%. Last year, there was a 2% increase added to roll growth. We do not anticipate a 2% CPI for this next year. I want to emphasize as well that this number does not reflect the impacts on the real estate market of COVID-19. We are anticipating significant impact on the real estate market, particularly on commercial properties. We're also expecting a dramatic increase in the number of assessment appeals, as well as decline in value applications, which reflects a negative market impact of COVID. As I mentioned previously, the value of properties established as of January 1st each year. It is not a blended date. It is a specific date, and that is January 1st, which was a couple of months prior to the outbreak of COVID. So if your property lost value in March, April, May, June, and beyond, that reduction will not be reflected in our assessment until January 1st of next year, and any property tax relief that you may be entitled to won't be until the fall 2021 billing cycle. However, up till June 30th, that 2020 represented the 10th consecutive year of property value growth in the county since the recession of 2008 to 2010. According to our current annual report, which we have just released, the city of Santa Clarita fared in the top 20 highest valued cities in the county. Its property values grew at 5.8%, with an assessed value of over $37 billion, spread over 62,000 single-family residences, 492 rental properties, and 4,657 commercial industrial parcels. I think a lot of that just is a real strong indication of what a great community and what a well-governed city of Santa Clarita is and has been. Even during the pandemic, there are some major developments continuing to make progress in the city of Santa Clarita. The Lumley Theater is one of them, and adjacent to it is the newly completed Newhall Crossing, a mixed-use site, which I hear is filling fast. I believe that residential units are already 80% leased, and close to 70% of the commercial units are as well. Also in development is a new LA County Sheriff's Station. We won't be assessing that because that's government property, but hopefully it will continue to keep Santa Clarita safe and make it an inviting community for residents and businesses and visitors. These new developments, along with steady growth, will see Santa Clarita continue to increase its assessed value in 2021 despite COVID. However, some of the uncertainty due to the pandemic, don't want to make any, don't want to speculate too affirmatively. But if you're interested in other data or information on another specific city, we can certainly send that over. Our current annual report is going to be coming out online in the next couple days, I think, and you'll be able to look that up yourself. The median sales price of single-family homes in LA County has steadily increased over the course of the pandemic. The median sales price stood at $879,000 as of September. That's over a $200,000 increase over March, where it was at $638,000. But I do need to add that that's kind of a bit of a mirage. The number of transactions has reduced dramatically, and those that are selling are in the higher end, which is why that median sales price seems to be pushed up. And also, because of the pandemic, the inventory of available properties has reduced. Those that are mostly available are on the higher end. The median sales price of a single-family residence in Santa Clarita is $620,000. It's $630 in Acton, $719 in Agua Dulce, and there's some other stats that are there on your screen. Also related to COVID is we anticipate that there's going to be an increase in what we call decline in value applications, also known as Proposition 8. A decline in value essentially is gives the property an opportunity to formally disagree with the property value that we established on January 1st. A DIV happens when your market value of a property falls below your adjusted base year. Simply speaking, if your property is worth less now than when you paid for it, you're entitled to property tax relief, because I am required by law to enroll the lesser of the two of those values. However, as I said before, lost value in the current market of COVID is not going to be reflected on the tax bill that you just received. That won't be reflected to the January 1st, 2021 lien date and next year's tax bill. But we've been trying to get the information out as much as we can to property owners in LA County, and did want to let you know if you really want to file an application for decline value, the application period is open through November 30th. Getting kind of close to the end of my presentation, but I did want to take a moment to talk about a couple of the ballot measures which will have a significant impact on my office and county assessors throughout the state. There's two of them. One of them is Prop 15, the other one is Prop 19. I'm sure you're all familiar with Prop 15, also known as the Split Roll Initiative. It's a constitutional amendment that would change the law and require that assessors reassess commercial and industrial properties on an annual or a cyclical basis, but no more than every 3 years, rather than under the current system, which says that property has to be reassessed only when there's a new construction or a change in ownership. California has not done this type of appraisal since 1978 when Prop 13 went into effect. It's going to have a significant operational impact on my office, and it's likely to take a very long time to implement. I have, just to give you a couple of statistics, I have about 100 commercial appraisers on staff right now who are qualified to do these more complex and high-valued appraisals. We estimate that we're going to need another 500. So that's a 5-time increase of the number I have right now. Takes 5 years minimum to train a commercial industrial appraiser. So the Prop 15 requires that we begin rolling out these new values starting in 2022. There's no way I can hire 500 people and give them 5 years training within 24 months. So that's going to be a significant challenge for our office. So we're expecting a lot of appeals and a lot of operational obstacles that will keep us from being able to implement this measure, I believe, in anything less than 5 years, and much more realistically, closer to 10. The other ballot measure is Prop 19, which would allow homeowners who are 55 or older the disabled or victims of natural disasters to transfer their property tax base with them when they sell their home and purchase a new one. It's a constitutional amendment that will also prevent people who inherit family properties from keeping the low property tax base unless they use that home as the primary residence and the market value is less than $1 million. Under current law, seniors can transfer their base year once to a property of equal or lesser value and only in 15 participating counties. So Prop 19 would expand that. They'll allow you to transfer your value up to 3 times in any county in California. The current law allows you to inherit property from your parents, allows you to inherit the full value of their primary residence plus an additional $1 million in other property, residential and commercial. This will narrow that list and ensure that the reason this measure was passed in the first place, Prop 58, which is being subject to the Prop 19 modification, was intended to keep the family home in the family. But there's a lot of families who don't keep it in the family. They rent it out on Airbnb and it becomes a profit center, and that was not really the intent, and that's a loophole that the authors are hoping to close. As I said, both Prop 15 and 19 mean significant operational changes in our office. I'm confident we can do it, although I don't know that we can do it in the timeframes that have been allowed. But as I've told the authors and as I told legislators, if you give me enough money, enough people, and enough time, we can certainly get it done. So just a few other quick things, things you might want to know that get people out of trouble with the assessor's office. One is deals with what to do when there's the death of a property owner. The law says that if when a property owner dies, that the heirs or the estate must, by law, notify the assessor's office within 150 days of death by filing a change in ownership death of real property owner form with my office. If you don't do so, you could be subject to a fine, but more importantly, it can complicate inheritance, especially if you want to take advantage of the parent-to-child transfer. People ask all the time when they get assessed. The tax bills are out. Some people's tax bills went up a lot more than 2%, and they want to know why their property gets reassessed. The answer is it does not, only if you did new construction or only if you did a change in ownership, such as adding somebody or deleting somebody from title. Typically, if your bill went up a lot, it was not your property taxes, but it was a special assessment or bonded indebtedness or school taxes. That is usually the one that went up, and those things are not, they're billed on your property tax bill, but they're not property taxes. If you add a garage or an ADU or enclose a porch, those are assessable. We don't reassess your entire property, just the additional square footage. But if you're doing like a kitchen remodel or replacing your roof or adding a new bath or remodeling a bathroom, those are, in most cases, those are typically not reassessable. And also, if you find that you're doing a remodel, you discover that city records and the assessor records are not in sync, that they show different numbers of rooms or square footage, and you want to know whose records to believe, the cities are the records that you need to rely on. They're the ones that legally determine what can be on that property. The assessor will record what we see, and if we see that you added a garage but it wasn't permitted, we will assess you for that new garage, but we don't get to opine on whether it was legal or not. And moving along, I did want to remind you that reminder for businesses that our office conducts annual seminars to help you fill out the business personal property statement. This year we did it by webinar due to COVID, which can be found under our website under the media tab. Any business with $5,000 of personal property or more, and personal property is furniture, equipment, computers, etc. If you have $5,000 or more, you're required to file the business property statement, also called 571L, and pay property taxes on that. In the spring, we will be doing a lot more, sending a lot more information about those webinars to help you complete those documents if you need assistance. But that pretty much concludes my presentation. That's a look inside my office. I want to thank you for inviting me to be with you and taking the time to listen. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I want to again thank Peter for helping put this together, and thank my good friend John Musella for inviting me. And I look forward to your questions.
Jeff, thank you so much for all this information. I think what the assessor does is important, and so many folks don't, as you point out, necessarily understand your role. So I think it's always good to help people understand what it is you do and the good work your office does. We do have some questions coming in, and just wanted to start sharing those with you. I know you talked a lot about Prop 15. I did want everyone on here to know that the Santa Cruz Valley Chamber does oppose Prop 15 and split roll. We think it would be devastating to the economy and to businesses. And even though it's the commercial and retail businesses ownership that's going to be taxed, the reality is that those additional taxes are going to be passed on to the businesses in those commercial buildings. So if you rent an office space or retail space, those expenses are going to be passed on to a lot of small businesses, which especially now as a result of COVID are struggling to keep open, if they are allowed to be open, struggling to keep open. And so this could have just a devastating impact on the economy. And I guess one of the questions here that we have coming in is, if Prop 15 does pass, what's the realistic rollout timeline compared to what the proposition would mandate?
I'm guessing, so a lot of these things are, from my perspective, are data driven. So let me give you just a few statistics. So we've got about 600 appraisers. We lose about 35 a year to retirement and other issues of attrition. I will need to hire 500 additional appraisers to do the work. And the way the work works now is we assess probably 5,000 to 10,000 commercial industrial properties on average in a given year. There's 200,000 commercial properties in the county. 140,000 fall under the provisions of Prop 15. So my workload is going to go from 5,000 to 10,000 assessments per year to 140,000. So we know how many appraisers we need to do that work, and it is a increase by a multiple of 5. So I can't hire 500 people. On a good year, I'm lucky if I can do, on a really good year, which has not happened since I've been here, we can do 2 classes of 30 appraisers. It puts a lot of strain on our organization because I have to pull people off production to train the new people. So I don't have the capacity to hire these 500 people in a short period of time without additional assistance. Secondly, a commercial industrial property appraiser requires a minimum of 5 years training. They go through 1 year of classroom and field training, a year of apprenticeship, and then 3 years of residential. And then we assign them to do basic commercial like strip malls. But the people who do office towers downtown and business parks and stadiums, those people usually have 10, 15, 20 years experience. So even if I could hire 500 people on day one, which I can't give them 5 years training in the 24 months that I have to implement the measure. So we're going to.
So basically, Prop 15 doesn't take into account the realistic implementation as far as being able to ramp up the number of appraisers, being able to train people in a timely fashion to actually properly implement this.
That was, if I had the opportunity, that's what I would have told the proponents, that you need to factor in the on-the-ground operational and administrative challenges to doing what you want. What we will, but the law is going to be pretty clear. We're going to have to do some of these things by some prescribed deadlines. So the way that we're going to, and we're going to do it, if the people vote this in, that will be my duty, is to get it done. But we're going to have to use a lot of shortcuts, which in and of themselves will create a lot of unintended consequences. For instance, to get enough appraisers to do that work within the time frame necessary, I will move all of my residential appraisers into commercial. So they're good qualified people, but they've not been trained to do commercial. So the valuations that they're going to do are not going to be as, the quality is going to be impaired. And that's going to generate thousands of appeals. So the appellate process for appeals or for valuations is going to probably explode. But because I'm also shifting residential into commercial, I'm not going to have anybody doing residential. We're going to rely exclusively on computer-generated models. Other states do that, but their laws work differently. What that means is that we're going to get thousands of residential appeals as well, because the technology to comply with California law is not precise enough. You're entitled to a fair and equitable value on your property. And if we come in with, if you own your home and we have $50,000 off, that's $500 a year in taxes you're gonna have to pay. So people are expecting explosion in appeal.
I was gonna say, we of course live in California, the land of lawsuits, and I would presume that someone will challenge Prop 15 in court if it is passed. I guess at that point the question would be is, do you still start that reevaluation process if it's being challenged in court?
Yes, that would determine what the court orders. Sometimes they will suspend the implementation until those issues are resolved. It could be they allow it to go forward. The likelihood is, even if the court suspended implementation, we would probably begin to do a lot of the work to. I still need a whole bunch of appraisers, so I'll use it as an opportunity to staff up and be prepared and start providing those, evaluating the different strategies necessary to make it work.
Obviously Prop 15 is designed to create additional income streams for other areas in the state budget. Does Prop 15 allow for any of that money to be used to hiring these additional appraisers that are going to be needed to do the actual work?
Yeah, they did put a relatively generous amount of money for the administration of this system. I don't know whether it is sufficient to deal with all the various departments. I think there's enough money allocated to assessors, but we're not the only ones that have a piece of this. There's the treasurer tax collector, who's going to have a huge workload increase, the auditor controller. The other one is, because of the appeals, county council. There's going to be a lot more lawsuits, and we have to dedicate a lot more legal services, especially in the first 10 years. And even something that came up yesterday, I talked to the county's lobbyist in Sacramento, because we already know a lot of areas that are going to require legislative correction and or interpretation. So even the county's lobbyists, we have to hire more, have more bandwidth in Sacramento to ensure that we can get all the corrections and fixes addressed legislatively.
Right.
Probably for several years.
Right. One of the other questions that came in was, what is the financial impact on your office for hiring another 500 appraisers? Do you have a rough estimate of what that looks like?
So my current budget is somewhere between 180 and 190 million. We estimate that I'll need a one-year augmentation of an additional 200 million and an ongoing in year one, and then I'll need a permanent increase of 150 million. So it's roughly a doubling of my current budget. Which
obviously with the county struggles, given COVID financial struggles, it's not like the county has extra money laying around in the general fund to cover these costs, not only for your department, but for treasurer tax, county council, et cetera.
One of the challenges we're going to have is it's unclear at this point how and when we get the money to pay for all these things. I don't know that there's a provision to front load the expenses so we can spend, obviously the county revenues are down dramatically. So they're not sitting on a pot of money to pay for all these things. The legislature is going to have to allocate upfront dollars to county assessors across the state so that we can begin to do this work.
Right. These are things obviously that are going to be needed to be worked out by you, and I'm glad we've got you there to do it best we can. We know you're well qualified. You got a good team behind you. I think we had one other question on Prop 15 as to, is there going to be any impacts from Prop 15 on residential properties, on households?
So I don't believe so. I don't think there's anything that should impact residential assessments. I did see an ad, which I'm a little confused by, saying that Prop 15 will actually lower residential assessments. I've had my staff looking at that. We're confused and we're not quite sure how they got to that number. At least that's what their analysts seem to believe. I think the The economic impact that was not studied very thoroughly is on small businesses. So just to use an example, let's say there's a corner market in Santa Clarita that's been there for 50 years, and they've had the same landlord for 50 years. And let's say it's in the most expensive part of town. Well, obviously the assessed value from 50 years ago to today has changed dramatically. And if that small business owner leases under a triple net lease where they're responsible for their share of the property taxes, that could be a rather dramatic increase for a small business. And if you're a small retail business which operates on small margins, that could very well mean the whether you're going to stay in business or not. And if for whatever reason the property owner decides not to help you stay in businesses by not increasing the rent too much, he probably in turn will then file an appeal asking for his property assessment to be lowered because the property is not worth as much as it used to be because he can't lease it for the rents that he had been doing previously and do those property tax pass-throughs. Those are some of the economic impacts that I don't quite know how they will play out, but we do know when you make property more expensive to own, the market will react, and that will filter its way down through the entire chain.
Right. No, I totally understand that. We actually do have one more question, which relates to what you had just spoken about. If Prop 15 passes and causes an immediate decline in property value, how long does it take for a property tax appeal, especially given the fact that you're going to have so many people out working on reappraising?
So I hate to say this, and this is because this condition is going to be really difficult for me. It's going to make me look really, really bad. But if you have an appeal, if your taxes go up at a level that you don't think are fair, you could probably expect to have to wait a few years. It's not going to be something done in weeks or months, because we currently are dealing with, currently have a backlog of appeals going all the way back to the 2008 recession. Over 30,000 cases still waiting to be heard. If I didn't receive a single new case from today going forward, it would take about 2 years to clear this backlog. So we're now going to be reassessing. Even if we do the valuations based on a cyclical basis, that's about 45,000 properties on an annual basis. And remember, currently we only do about 5 to 10. So we don't have the people to do fair and accurate values on those. So those new assessments we're going to give are going to enroll are going to generate a huge number of appeals, and that's going to overwhelm the system. And then we're going to be at a difficult issue because the demands on our personnel to handle appeals will now be competing with our demand on personnel to do the valuations. And typically appeals have a higher priority. They have shorter deadlines and statutory requirements. So it's likely that we will move more and more people into appeals away from property valuations. It's just, it's until I can get a sufficient number of personnel to deal with all these operational challenges, it's going to be a mess. And it's going to take a very, very long time. But if you have an appeal, the likelihood is you'll have to pay the disputed property taxes for a couple of years until we get through that very, very large inbox.
Yeah, no, we've got to do I think we all need to do a better job of getting this information out to the general public, to those who are voting, because it's nice to say we need more money for all these things and this proposition is going to fund all these things. But the reality is we're going to see more businesses going out of business who can't pay the rent, literally, because it's become too expensive to do business here. And that's why the chamber obviously has opposed this. I know your office obviously has not taken a position, but certainly chambers and other business organizations have been opposed to this and are trying to get the information as best as possible. And the information you're sharing with us today is so valuable. I think it's just so important that we all work hard to get that information out as quickly as possible so people understand the real world implications of this.
Well, I appreciate that. I've tried to position myself in this whole debate as a fair and unbiased arbiter of the facts. As assessor, I'm not a policymaker. I am not, I don't have, my opinion on property tax policy is no more valid than somebody who's a florist. We are simply administer the law. But I think it's extremely important that the public believe that the guy who's in charge of putting fair and accurate values on property doesn't have his thumb on the scale. And so what I'm trying to do is give an honest and clear understanding of the operational needs and challenges and obstacles, so that whatever your position is in favor or against it, you can make a better informed decision. But clearly the obstacles and challenges are quite significant.
No, definitely, and I appreciate the fact the fairness and the balance and the ethics you've brought to the assessor's office. I think is so important. And when you just hear the basic facts, it's so easy to draw the conclusion that this is unfortunately not well thought out here. We do have a question regarding ADUs. Someone's asked, how does your office find if someone has added an ADU?
So the law requires, under the specific laws under the Revenue and Taxation Code, all cities and municipal agencies, anyone who issues permits for building and new construction, are required to provide the assessor with a copy of that. So if you built an ADU and behind your home and you pulled a permit with the city of Santa Clarita Building and Safety Department or Planning Department will send us a copy of the building plans and that permit, and then we will dispatch an appraiser to value it. People ask how we deal with ADUs. I don't know if that's part of the question or not, but an ADU is not anything special for us. It's just like if you put a pool in, if you're adding a second story, it's just like any other new construction permit. And we will generally assess the new added square footage, usually using a cost methodology. We do not reassess your entire property, just the addition.
Are you seeing a lot more ADUs being added to units across LA County?
Yeah, the new law, which made it easier to develop them, has created a big spurt in construction. Okay,
good to know. Well, we are almost out of time here, Jeff. I did want to just mention that you'd obviously brought up Prop 19 earlier as well. The Chamber is officially on record supporting Prop 19, and anyone who's listening in who wants to know more information on the Chamber's positions, please check out our Chamber website, scvchamber.com, for more information on those positions and candidates. But at this point, I really want to thank you, Jeff, on behalf of the Chamber and all of our members for being with us today. You and your team have been fantastic to work with, and we so appreciate everything you've done. And the refinements and reforms you've brought to the assessor's office have been terrific. And from a business perspective, we truly appreciate that. And of course, your unbiased conversation with us today relative to the real world effects of Prop 15. For those of you listening in, if we didn't get your question, if you have any other questions, please email us at hello@scvchamber.com. And we're going to do our best to help get those questions answered for you. Just also want to let you know that the SCV Chamber is continuing its work for our business community by advocating for a healthy business climate and safe reopening of our businesses, and ensuring that our businesses are well covered during this time and represented. As a reminder, we do have our COVID-19 resource page on our website, so please make sure to visit that if you have any additional questions or needs. The City of Santa Clarita has just approved $500,000 in grant funding for small businesses, up to $5,000 per business for reimbursement. You can get that link on our website or at the city. And the County of LA also has a program as well, a little bit more restricted on which businesses are eligible, but all that information can be found at scvchamber.com for our business community. With that, I want to say thank you again to our good friend, Assessor Jeff Prang, for being with us today. And please be safe and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you all virtually very soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Jeff.